Imagine this. Today, Earth is home to more than 8 billion people. We crowd cities, stretch across continents, and fill the planet with our inventions, languages, and dreams. But rewind the clock nearly a million years, and the story of humanity looks nothing like this. The planet was colder, harsher, more unforgiving, and in that distant past, something almost impossible happened. Our ancestors, early humans struggling to survive against a brutal climate, were reduced to just 1280 breeding individuals. That's it. Not 1.28 million, not even 128,000. Just a group smaller than the crowd at a local concert. If fate had shifted only slightly, we would not be here. Humanity's entire future balanced on a razor's edge, with survival decided not by empires or inventions, but by whether a few hundred families could endure drought, hunger, predators, and time itself. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, we'll walk through their world. We'll see what life was like for those who carried the torch of existence through the darkest ages. And in the silence of their struggle, we'll realize that our very existence today is their ultimate victory. Let's pause for a moment on that number. 1280. Imagine an entire planet stripped down to fewer people than fit in a single small village. Think of the vulnerability of such a situation. One epidemic, one volcanic eruption, one series of bad winters could have erased us forever. Scientists call this event a population bottleneck. In biology, when numbers fall this low, extinction usually follows. The genetic variation collapses, inbreeding becomes inevitable, and survival odds shrink with each passing generation. And yet, somehow, our ancestors defied the pattern. They were not mighty rulers or great conquerors. They had no cities, no written language, no armies. What they did have was determination, cooperation, and a capacity to adapt to challenges that would have destroyed other species. Every one of us alive today descends from those few survivors. Their success is carved into our DNA, preserved like a message from the past that whispers, "We were small, but we endured." The bottleneck didn't happen in peaceful times. It came during one of the most violent climate transitions in Earth's history. The planet was shifting from relatively mild ice age cycles of 41,000 years to the brutal 100,000-year ice age rhythms that would dominate the next million years. The northern continents were locked beneath massive ice sheets. Sea levels fell by hundreds of feet. Temperatures swung between extremes. In Africa, where our ancestors lived, the world grew hotter and drier. Grasslands turned to deserts, rivers dried up, animals vanished. Imagine being one of those early humans, watching your familiar landscape wither away. Waterholes that once sustained families and herds turned to dust. Hunting grounds grew empty. Plant foods shriveled in the heat. Generations passed in hunger and fear. In such a world, survival wasn't just difficult, it was nearly impossible. And for the vast majority of our kind, it truly was. Entire human populations disappeared. Only a sliver endured. Only 1280. Picture their lives, small family groups scattered across unforgiving terrain, each clan numbering perhaps a dozen or two. Their nights were lit only by fire, their days spent in constant search of food. Predators stalked them, saber-toothed cats, hyenas, crocodiles larger than anything alive today. Hunger gnawed at their stomachs. Droughts turned entire seasons into wastelands. And yet these small bands kept moving. They tracked animals across barren plains, dug for roots, cracked bones for marrow, and huddled together for warmth. Survival was not a guarantee, not even for a single season. But across centuries, then millennia, they endured. The miracle is not that they thrived, because they didn't. The miracle is that they refused to vanish. Every fire they lit, every child they raised, every migration to a slightly better patch of land kept the human story alive. And over time, those fragile lives formed the bridge between extinction and survival. Scientists still puzzle over how exactly this tiny population managed to survive for more than 100,000 years. Perhaps they found refuges near rivers or lakes that never fully dried. Fire was more than warmth. It was safety from predators, a tool for cooking, and a gathering place that built community. Or maybe their survival came from social cohesion, from the strength of working together. When numbers fall so low, conflict can spell doom, but cooperation can mean life. Genetic studies suggest that during this bottleneck, unusual changes spread quickly through the population, including the fusion of two chromosomes that all humans carry today. This wasn't just survival, it was transformation. Our species was being reshaped in the furnace of desperation, pressed into something new by the weight of near extinction. The survivors didn't just keep humanity alive, they planted the seeds of what humanity would become. In biology, there's a terrifying concept called the extinction vortex. It happens when a population becomes so small that it cannot escape the spiral of decline. Inbreeding increases. One unlucky century could have ended everything. To put it into perspective, the population of our entire species was smaller than many endangered species alive today. Gorillas, for instance, number in the tens of thousands. Tigers, thousands. The human line had been reduced to less than 1,300 souls, fewer than some modern-day high schools. And yet, somehow, against all odds, they escaped the vortex. They found just enough resources, just enough resilience, just enough luck to keep the line alive. That survival alone is one of the greatest stories in the natural history of Earth. For decades, scientists were puzzled by what they called the fossil gap. Between about 950,000 and 650,000 years ago, almost no human fossils were found. It was as if our ancestors had simply vanished from the Earth. But now we know the truth. They hadn't vanished. They were simply so few in number that their remains were almost never preserved. Fossilization is already rare. It requires a body to be buried quickly in the right conditions, untouched by scavengers, protected from erosion. If you combine that rarity with a species that numbers barely over 1,000, the chances of fossils surviving are vanishingly small. The silence of the fossil record wasn't a mystery. It was a reflection of reality. There were so few humans alive during this time that the Earth barely remembered them. And yet, those silent centuries held the most critical chapter of our survival story. If fossils were silent, our DNA was not. Hidden inside our cells is the record of this near extinction. Scientists studying modern human genomes found that our genetic diversity is shockingly low compared to other species. Chimpanzees, for example, living in scattered groups across Africa, have more variation among them than all 8 billion humans alive today. That imbalance was the first clue. Then, new computational tools allowed scientists to trace our genes backward in time like a molecular clock. What they found was startling. Around 900,000 years ago, the genetic line collapsed. Billions of potential variations were lost. Only a sliver remained. That was the bottleneck. Today, we all carry its mark in our DNA. Every one of us is descended from those 1280 survivors. Their struggle is written in the code of our existence. It's easy to think of early humans as hunters, but for much of history, we were also prey. On the plains of Africa, our ancestors shared the land with lions, leopards, giant hyenas, and crocodiles. At night, the darkness belonged to predators. Imagine a small human group huddled around a fire, listening to the growls and footsteps in the distance. The fire kept most hunters at bay, but not all. Children had to be guarded constantly. Adults risked their lives every time they hunted or foraged. To be human in this age meant to live with fear as a constant companion. And yet, fear was also a teacher. It sharpened our instincts. It pushed us to invent weapons, to cooperate in groups, to find safety in numbers. Fear became the crucible in which intelligence was forged. Our ancestors were fragile, but they were clever. And cleverness was their most powerful weapon of all. The bottleneck wasn't a single year or even a single generation. It stretched for 117,000 years, longer than modern humans have existed as a species. That means dozens upon dozens of generations lived and died under constant threat of extinction. Children were born into hunger. Families struggled through harsh winters. Elders passed down knowledge not through writing but through stories, gestures, and survival skills. Imagine the patience it took. For more than 100,000 years, the human population hovered at the edge of disappearance. Yet, they kept going. Every small success, a successful hunt, a safe shelter, a fire that lasted the night, was a victory not just for that group, but for the entire future of humanity. The long winter of humanity nearly froze us out of existence. But somehow, the flame never went out. Think for a moment about what 1280 people actually looks like. Imagine them all gathered in one place. A single crowd at a village square, perhaps. That was the entire breeding population of our species. Every man, every woman, every child mattered. There was no anonymity. Each person carried part of humanity's fragile future on their shoulders. When a child was born, it wasn't just a family event. It was a victory for all of humanity. When someone died, it wasn't just a personal loss. It was a blow against our survival. These people didn't know that the weight of the species rested on them, of course. To them, life was simply hard, and every day was a fight to see another sunrise. But from the perspective of history, those 1280 individuals were the entire world. Without them, there would be no us. Scientists believe these survivors must have found some kind of refuge, a pocket of land that offered stability when much of Africa was drying and collapsing into wasteland. Perhaps it was near the Great Rift Valley, where tectonic activity created lakes and rivers that endured even through harsh climates. Perhaps it was in sheltered forests that held onto moisture when the plains withered. A refuge wasn't just about water and food. It was about predictability. When everything else changed, this small patch of earth might have remained stable enough for people to endure. Archaeologists like Nick Ashton have suggested that such a refuge would need three things: reliable resources, social cohesion, and relative safety from outside stresses. If those conditions existed, then a tiny group could survive not for decades, but for millennia. The refuge, wherever it was, became the cradle of humanity's survival. Fire was more than a tool. It was a turning point. Around 800,000 years ago, archaeological sites show a sharp increase in the controlled use of fire. The timing matches almost perfectly with the end of the bottleneck. Coincidence? Probably not. Fire changed everything. It allowed food to be cooked, unlocking more nutrients and making diets richer. It extended the day, letting people gather after sunset, strengthening social bonds. It drove away predators, turning the night from a time of terror into a time of safety. And in colder climates, fire meant survival. For small groups, fire was not just warmth. It was life itself. Every flame that was kept burning through the night represented not just comfort, but continuity. The spark of survival wasn't just metaphorical. It was literal, flickering in the darkness as the ancestors of humanity held on. One of the strangest twists of this story is written into our chromosomes. At some point during this bottleneck, two ancestral chromosomes fused together, creating what we now call human chromosome 2. Our closest relatives, chimpanzees, gorillas, and orangutans, still have 48 chromosomes. Humans have 46 because of that ancient fusion. Events like this are incredibly rare, happening only once in millions of years. But in a population as small as 1280, genetic quirks could spread rapidly. If one individual carried the fused chromosome and survived, their descendants could soon pass it on to the entire group. Today, every single human alive carries this fused chromosome. Some scientists even believe that genes near the fusion site affected brain development, perhaps giving us an edge in intelligence. If so, then a random genetic accident during humanity's weakest moment may have planted the seed of our greatest strength, the human mind. For small groups living on the edge of extinction, cooperation wasn't optional, it was essential. No single person could gather enough food, fend off predators, and care for children alone. Survival depended on sharing burdens. Hunters brought meat. Gatherers found roots and fruits. Firekeepers tended flames. Elders carried knowledge. Children carried hope. If conflicts tore groups apart, survival odds dropped sharply. But if they held together, they stood a chance. This pressure likely shaped humans' social instincts. The drive to form bonds, to share stories, to help one another in times of need, all may trace back to these bottleneck generations. Cooperation was humanity's lifeline. Even today, when we live in vast cities surrounded by billions of strangers, that ancient need for connection lingers. It is the echo of a time when the whole species was so small, that every bond could mean the difference between survival and extinction. Africa, nearly 1 million years ago, was not the rich green continent many imagine. It was a land under siege by climate. Forests shrank into scattered patches. Grasslands turned brittle. Rivers dried into dust. Entire regions became deserts. The animals that had once roamed in abundance vanished or migrated elsewhere, leaving hunters to face long, hungry days. For early humans, every journey for food or water was a gamble. They could walk for miles and find nothing. They could risk hunting and instead become the hunted. Their lives were dictated by droughts and storms, by cycles of scarcity that stretched for centuries. The survivors of this age lived in a world that tested not just their strength, but their endurance. To live in such a land required not only physical toughness, but mental resilience. The ability to endure hardship day after day, generation after generation. When we speak of 117,000 years of survival, it's hard to imagine the scale. That is not one lifetime, nor 10, nor 100. It is thousands upon thousands of lifetimes. Entire generations lived and died in the bottleneck without knowing that their struggle was part of something far larger. For them, survival was immediate. Finding food, avoiding predators, caring for children. They didn't know that history would one day look back and recognize their resilience as the turning point for all of humanity. Each small success, a child surviving past infancy, a hunt yielding enough meat to last a week, a new fire carried from embers, was a step that carried humanity forward. These people lived in shadow, forgotten by time, their bones lost to the earth. And yet through them, the light of humanity never went out. The numbers remain haunting. 1280 breeding individuals. Modern biologists would call that a critically endangered population. For many species, such a number is a death sentence. Genetic diversity collapses. The species becomes vulnerable to disease. The odds of survival shrink with every generation, and yet humans beat those odds. How? Perhaps through adaptability. Our ancestors could eat many kinds of food, migrate when necessary, and use tools to expand their options. Perhaps through cooperation, social bonds gave them resilience that other species lacked. Or perhaps it was simply luck, that the small group who survived happened to be in the right place at the right time. Whatever the reason, humanity slipped through a genetic doorway so narrow that it should have closed. The fact that we exist today is proof of a narrow escape, a miracle of survival written in our very existence. It's worth imagining what would have happened if those 1280 had not survived. If the bottleneck had closed, there would be no humans today. No cities, no languages, no music, no art, no stories told across campfires. The earth would still be home to life, of course. Animals would roam, plants would thrive, the oceans would rise and fall. But there would be no one to look up at the stars and wonder. No one to paint caves, to carve tools, to build pyramids, to write books, to send machines into space. The human story would have ended before it began. The world would be missing not just a species, but an entire way of seeing and shaping reality. Every one of us alive today is living proof that this alternate history never happened. Humanity endured, and because of that endurance, the world was forever changed. At last, after 117,000 years of near extinction, something shifted. Around 813,000 years ago, human populations began to grow again. Slowly at first, then more rapidly, they spread across Africa and beyond. New technologies appeared, more sophisticated stone tools, more effective hunting strategies, greater use of fire. The descendants of those 1280 survivors began to thrive. This was the dawn after the longest night in our history. The bottleneck had nearly erased us, but instead it reshaped us. The humans who emerged from that crucible were not the same as those who entered it. They carried new genetic traits, new strengths, new capacities that would set the stage for the rise of modern humans, Neanderthals, and Denisovans. The age of struggle had forged resilience. From the narrowest thread of survival came the vast tapestry of humanity's future. Imagine one of those surviving groups at night. The sun has set, predators stir in the darkness, and the air cools quickly. But within a small circle of light, a fire burns. Families gather around, faces glowing in the flicker of flame. Children huddle close to their mothers. Elders share quiet sounds that might be the beginnings of language. Hunters carve tools while sparks rise into the night sky. This firelight was more than warmth. It was protection, it was community, and it was culture in its earliest form. In the silence beyond the flames lurked danger, but within them lived a fragile sense of safety. These nightly gatherings shaped humanity in ways we can still feel. Around fires, bonds deepened, knowledge was passed down, and ideas were born. The bottleneck wasn't just a struggle for survival. It was also the birthplace of humanity's most enduring habit: coming together. The survivors of the bottleneck were not empty-handed. By this time, humans were already shaping stone tools. Hand axes, sharp flakes, and cutting edges allowed them to butcher animals, scrape hides, and process plants. These tools, though simple by modern standards, were revolutionary for survival. With them, early humans could reach calories hidden inside bones, dig for roots, or defend themselves. Each generation passed down not only the tools themselves, but the knowledge of how to make them. Imagine a child sitting beside a parent, watching as stone is struck against stone until a sharp edge appears. That moment wasn't just practical. It was cultural. The skill was learned, remembered, improved, and shared. In this way, technology became the thread that tied generations together, carrying the fragile flame of knowledge across the long dark of the bottleneck years. Without writing, memory was everything. Elders carried stories, warnings, and knowledge of the land. They remembered where rivers had once flowed, where certain plants grew, where herds might return after a drought. They knew which roots could heal and which could kill, which caves offered shelter, which trails led to danger. Each piece of memory was a survival tool, and forgetting could mean death. Passing knowledge down was not optional, it was essential. Around fires, through gestures, through simple sounds and early words, this knowledge was transferred. Every generation became a living library, preserving what little humanity had learned. That tradition continues even now. The instinct to tell stories, to remember, to teach. These are not just cultural quirks. They are survival strategies, born in the crucible of the bottleneck, when forgetting meant extinction. One of the greatest challenges those 1280 faced was reproduction. In small populations, childbirth carries enormous weight. Every infant represented not just hope, but the continuation of humanity told. And yet childbirth was dangerous. Many women and infants did not survive. Diseases, malnutrition, and complications were common. When survival is this fragile, every child becomes precious. Imagine the relief when a baby took its first breath, the joy when it lived to see its first steps, the pride when it grew strong enough to help the group. In a population this small, the survival of each child shifted the balance of the entire species. Humanity endured not because all children lived, but because enough did. Enough mothers survived childbirth. Enough infants grew into adults, enough families carried forward. Every birth in those years was not just a family story, it was a victory for all of humankind. The bottleneck lasted 117,000 years. To us, that number is almost impossible to comprehend. For those who lived it, survival wasn't about grand strategies or distant futures. It was about patience. Day by day, season by season, year by year, they endured. Imagine a grandmother watching her grandchildren play, knowing that the world was hard, but hoping that life might be a little easier for them. Many groups likely carried embers from one place to another, guarding them like treasure. The loss of fire could mean death. Around fire, humanity became more than just another animal. It became a creature of the flame, mastering energy from nature itself. Fire allowed humans to stretch the hours of the day, creating nights filled not just with fear but with conversation, teaching, and perhaps even the first sparks of culture. Fire became both a weapon and a symbol. The light of survival, the heart of community, the very fire within humanity itself. Even today, scientists can trace the genetic fingerprints of the bottleneck. Hidden inside our DNA are patterns of low variation, signatures of a time when humanity nearly vanished. Compared to chimpanzees or gorillas, humans are surprisingly uniform at the genetic level. This is the cost of survival through 1280 ancestors. Diseases spread more easily, certain weaknesses persist, and genetic diversity remains limited. These scars are not just weaknesses, they are reminders. Each strand of DNA tells a story of survival against impossible odds. The fragility written into our biology is balanced by the strength of our adaptability. What could have been the end became instead the foundation for the human story. Biologists sometimes call it the evolutionary pressure cooker. In small populations, evolution accelerates. Traits that help survival spread quickly. Traits that harm fade away. The bottleneck years were a crucible, burning away weakness and refining strength. Cooperation, intelligence, adaptability, all were sharpened by necessity. This is why some scientists believe that humanity's greatest traits, from problem-solving to advanced communication, emerged during this long near death. Without the bottleneck, we might never have become who we are. It is strange to think that what nearly destroyed us also made us unstoppable. The pressure that almost erased humanity instead prepared us to master the world. Anthropologists once puzzled over a fossil gap between 950,000 and 650,000 years ago. Human remains from this period are almost non-existent. The reason, now clear, is sobering. There were too few of us to leave many fossils behind. Whole generations lived and died without leaving a trace in stone. It is as if humanity vanished, a ghostly absence in the Earth's record. And yet, we know they were there. We carry their genes, their resilience, their determination. The silence in the fossil record is not emptiness. It is the sound of survival whispered so quietly that only DNA remembers it. What is most extraordinary is not that humans survived, but that the thread of life was never broken. Across 117,000 years, children were still born, families still formed, and fire was still passed hand to hand. Every single one of us alive today is proof of an unbroken chain of survival. Not one generation failed. Not once did the flame go out completely. From parent to child, across ice ages and droughts, humanity endured. That continuity is the true miracle. 1,000 times the line could have ended, and 1,000 times it did not. That is the quiet triumph of the 1280, the legacy that defines us all. As you drift into sleep, imagine those distant ancestors sitting by the fire. The night is cold, but the flames warm their faces. Children huddle against parents. Elders murmur stories of survival, of seasons endured, of lessons learned. They do not know you. They cannot imagine skyscrapers, airplanes, or the internet. But they are fighting for you. Every ember they guard, every hunt they risk, every child they raise carries forward the hope of a future. That future is now. You are their dream fulfilled, the living echo of their endurance. So close your eyes, rest, and remember. The story of humanity is not one of easy victories, but of impossible survival. And because of them, you are here to dream another night. The greatest teachers our ancestors had were not classrooms or books. They were the land, the sky, and the animals around them. Rivers taught patience. Droughts taught resilience. Predator attacks taught caution and vigilance. Even failure was a teacher. Every lost hunt, every cold night, every tragic death carried lessons for those who remained. Over 117,000 years, humanity became students of the earth itself. And in that long apprenticeship, they learned the skills that would one day allow them to spread across the globe. The earth was harsh, but it was also generous, giving knowledge in exchange for endurance. At night, when the work was done and the dangers faded, humanity lifted its eyes to the stars. The same constellations we see today shone above them. Around the fire, those stars became guides, mysteries, and perhaps even the first seeds of belief. Fire and stars, two sources of light in a world of darkness, taught humans to look beyond the present moment. Fire said, "You can make warmth, you can make safety." The stars said, "There is something larger, something eternal." These whispers of wonder grew into curiosity, stories, and eventually the spiritual traditions that have shaped human culture for millennia. Imagine holding the knowledge that your entire species numbers fewer than 1,300 souls. Every life would feel precious, every death a devastating loss. Of course, Our ancestors likely didn't know the numbers, but they felt the fragility. They knew that a single bad season could wipe them out. This awareness left a deep imprint on humanity. It may explain why humans cling so fiercely to one another, why community and family feel sacred, why loss weighs so heavily. We carry the memory of fragility in our bones. Survival was never guaranteed. It was wrestled from a hostile world, one fragile step at a time. When the bottleneck ended and humanity began to grow again, survival was no longer the only goal. The skills, lessons, and strengths forged during near extinction became the foundation for something greater. Culture, innovation, and imagination. Humans didn't just endure, they began to dream. They painted on cave walls, crafted tools of elegance as well as function, and created communities bound by more than survival, bound by meaning. The road beyond survival was built by those who had once been clinging to life. Their victory was not just that they lived, but that they transformed survival into civilization. 8 billion lives today are the echo of 1280 long ago. Every heartbeat, every laugh, every dream is proof that humanity refused to vanish. Their struggle was immense, their world brutal, but their story did not end in silence. It blossomed into us. When you look at your hands, your family, your city, or the stars above, remember, all of it exists because a small group of humans endured the unendurable. Their survival was not just a moment in history. It was the foundation of history itself. And as you drift into sleep, carry this truth with you. You are not small. You are not alone. You are the living continuation of the greatest survival story ever told. Around the fire, memories were not private. They were communal. A child learned not just from their own mistakes, but from the mistakes and triumphs of their entire group. Elders recalled seasons of plenty and famine, describing which rivers still flowed when others dried, which animals migrated and when. These memories were passed through stories, fragments of spoken sounds, gestures, and reenactments. They were not written, but they were carried in voices, preserved in minds. This was humanity's first database, stored not in books but in people. Each retelling carved survival strategies deeper into collective memory. Forgetting was dangerous. Remembering meant life. Out of these early acts of memory came the foundation of culture, teaching, and eventually the vast knowledge systems that would define humanity. Memory became survival's anchor. For a group of just over 1,000 individuals, division could mean disaster. Cooperation wasn't optional, it was mandatory. No one person could hunt, gather, protect, and care for children all at once. Roles began to form. Some guarded, some gathered, some carried infants. Some learned how to sharpen stones or keep embers alive. Strength was important, but so was trust. A selfish act, hoarding food, refusing to share fire, could tear the group apart. Groups that cooperated survived. Groups that didn't disappeared. Over time, cooperation became hardwired into human behavior. Our brains evolved not just to solve problems, but to solve them together. The survival of those 1280 depended less on individual brilliance and more on collective effort. Humanity's greatest invention wasn't a tool or fire. It was the ability to work as one. Nature was merciless. Torrential rains, endless droughts, freezing winds. Every climate challenge tested humanity's resilience. Shelter was the difference between life and death. Some found caves and rock overhangs. Others built crude shelters of branches, hides, and stone. These shelters were more than protection. They were the beginnings of home. Within them, families gathered, food was stored, fire was shielded. The idea of indoors was born, however primitive. Each storm that battered their walls reminded humans of their fragility, but also of their ingenuity. They were not the strongest species, nor the fastest, but they could build. A fragile roof of branches became the ancestor of cities, skyscrapers, and every structure that shields us today. The need for shelter during those bottleneck years planted the seeds of architecture itself. With only 1280 humans alive, genetic diversity was painfully low. Inbreeding was unavoidable, and with it came risks, diseases, deformities, weakened immune systems. Some children didn't survive past infancy. Others carried hidden vulnerabilities. Yet in this crucible, natural selection worked relentlessly. Harmful traits sometimes disappeared when those who carried them did not survive to reproduce. Beneficial traits, however small, spread faster in such a tiny population. The result was paradoxical. While inbreeding threatened humanity with extinction, it also accelerated evolution. The human brain, immune system, and adaptability were shaped in part by this genetic squeeze. The scars remain today: our low genetic diversity, our susceptibility to certain diseases, but so does the strength. Humanity's survival wasn't clean or easy. It was messy, painful, and fragile. Yet it endured, shaping the species we would become. For 117,000 years, humanity existed on the edge of extinction. At times, the line between life and death blurred. There were nights when fire dwindled, mornings when no food remained, migrations that ended with more graves than survivors. And yet, the story didn't end there. Somehow, against all odds, the line was never broken. Generation after generation, humans endured. They adapted, remembered, cooperated, built, and believed in the next sunrise. Each of the 8 billion people alive today carries proof of their triumph in their DNA. The silent testimony that once, long ago, 1280 humans refused to give up. The fact that you are here, listening to this story, means they won. They survived the storm, the hunger, the predators, and the cold. And because they did, humanity became unstoppable. Even in the struggle to survive, curiosity never faded. Early humans noticed the stars wheeling overhead, the patterns of animals, the changes of seasons. This curiosity was not idle, it was practical. Watching the sky taught them when rains might return. Tracking animal migrations revealed where food would be found. Curiosity also drove experimentation. What happens if a stone is struck this way? Or if fire is fed this plant instead of that? Some experiments failed, but others changed everything. Curiosity turned survival into progress. It was the quiet force pushing humanity forward, even when resources were scarce. And within those 1280, curiosity became a defining trait, an evolutionary gift that made survival not just possible, but transformative. The same curiosity that lit their eyes still drives humanity today, from cave fires to space exploration. Somewhere in Africa, hidden by time, there must have been a refuge, a place where water still flowed, plants still grew, and animals still roamed, even when much of the world became harsh and unlivable. Scientists believe it may have been near Great Lakes or fertile river valleys, oases in a continent gripped by drought and shifting climates. In this sanctuary, the survivors found enough stability to endure. Children were born, tools were crafted, fires were kept alive. It wasn't paradise. Life was still brutal, but compared to the dying lands beyond, it was enough. This unknown refuge became humanity's cradle, a quiet stage upon which the future of the world depended. Every person alive today is linked by blood to the men, women, and children who walked that fragile land. It was the smallest homeland, with the largest legacy in history. Fire had been discovered long before the bottleneck, but it was during these desperate generations that mastery began. No longer just an accident of lightning strikes, fire became a controlled tool. Families carried embers across migrations, learning to keep them alive through storms and nights. Fire roasted roots into digestible meals, softened tough meat, and killed deadly pathogens. It warded off predators whose eyes glowed at the edges of darkness. But fire did more than protect the body, it transformed the mind. Sitting around flames gave humans their first evenings of extended time. They told stories, planned hunts, and deepened bonds. Fire became both survival and symbol. Warmth in a cold world, hope in endless night. And it was in those flames that humanity's spirit, resilient, curious, determined, burned brightest. After 117,000 years of struggle, something shifted. Populations began to grow again. Climate stabilized in certain regions, food became more abundant, and the fragile line of survival thickened into something stronger. Groups that had lived hand to mouth for generations could finally expand, explore, and innovate. The bottleneck had ended, but its lessons endured. Cooperation, memory, curiosity, and resilience had been burned into humanity's identity. The world was still dangerous, but humans were no longer barely surviving, they were beginning to thrive. This turning point marked the dawn of new possibilities. From this seed of growth would eventually rise Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, and Denisovans, branches of the human family tree that would shape prehistory. The near extinction had not broken humanity, it had forged it. The story of the bottleneck is not just a tale of numbers. It is a reminder of fragility and strength, of despair and resilience. At one point in time, all of humanity fit into a group smaller than a small town. Yet from that tiny seed grew everything we know. Art, language, science, love, cities, and dreams. The survival of those 1280 was not guaranteed. It was earned through suffering, endurance, and the refusal to give up. And because they endured, you exist. Every human alive carries their DNA, their story, their victory over impossible odds. So when you feel small, fragile, or overwhelmed, remember this. You are living proof that humanity can survive the unthinkable. You are the echo of survival, the dream of ancestors who would never know your name, but fought so that you could walk this earth. Every person alive today represents an unbroken line stretching back to that tiny group. Imagine it, not one generation failed, not once did the line snap. Across ice ages, droughts, predators, and famine, the chain held firm. Each parent lived long enough to bring forth children, and those children carried the flame onward. The odds of this are staggering. Yet here you are, proof that the fragile thread of humanity never broke. Our greatest inheritance is not wealth or monuments, but continuity itself. The bottleneck is remembered not in fossil beds or artifacts, but in silence. A silence in the record where bones should be. A silence in our DNA where diversity should exist. And yet, silence is not an emptiness, it is a reminder. It says, there was once a time when humanity whispered instead of roared, when the world nearly forgot us. In that silence lies humility, an acknowledgement that survival is never guaranteed, but always earned. Listening to that silence teaches us to value what we have, because it was almost lost. What united those 1280 was not just blood, but struggle. Every person carried the same burdens: hunger, fear, cold, and uncertainty. In such conditions, empathy was not abstract, it was survival. To care for the weak, to protect the young, to mourn the lost was to hold the group together. Shared struggle became the foundation of shared humanity. This legacy still shapes us. We seek connection, belonging, and compassion, not just out of kindness, but because they once kept us alive. Humanity's survival is proof that cooperation is stronger than isolation. Not all who struggled survived, but even those who perished left behind gifts. The hunters who fell to predators taught caution. The gatherers who found toxic plants taught which foods to avoid. The children who didn't live long still pushed their parents to protect, adapt, and endure. Each sacrifice shaped the survivors. In this way, even the forgotten became heroes. Every person, successful or not, played a part in keeping the flame alive. The story of humanity is not only about the strong, but about the countless lives that, through loss, carried wisdom forward. The echo of 1280 lives did not stop with survival. It continues to multiply. Each life today, each heartbeat adds to their legacy. The laughter of a child, the creation of art, the discovery of knowledge. All of it is an echo amplified across time. When you sleep, when you dream, when you wake tomorrow, you are continuing the story they began. The bottleneck was not the end. It was the beginning of humanity's greatest journey. From the brink of extinction to the edge of the stars, the echo of their survival will never fade. In those ancient days, no one knew that their choices, their endurance, their will to survive would one day give rise to cities, civilizations, and futures beyond imagination. But every small act, a mother feeding her child, a hunter bringing back game, a family huddling close in a storm, was planting seeds of tomorrow. These were not grand gestures, but quiet acts of persistence. And yet from them grew everything that defines humanity today. The seeds of tomorrow are often sown in the soil of struggle, watered with patience, and harvested only by future generations. Through all the ages, one symbol stood above the rest: fire. It burned in caves and open plains, by river banks and beneath the stars. Fire was warmth, safety, and light, but it was also memory. To keep the fire alive was to keep humanity alive. And so, generation after generation, the fire never went out. It was passed along, protected, and cherished. That flame is still with us, though we may hold it now in the form of knowledge, spirit, and technology. The fire of survival still burns in every human heart, guiding us forward just as it did for those 1280. The near extinction of humanity could have been a tragedy, a forgotten story erased by time, but instead, it became the turning point. In that fragile, narrow passage of history, humanity discovered its resilience. The bottleneck wasn't just an obstacle, it was a forge. Inside that crucible of hardship, the human spirit was tested, tempered, and made stronger. From that near end came a beginning, the rise of a species destined not just to survive, but to shape the world around it. Without that struggle, we would not be who we are today. Every breath you take carries the legacy of those who came before. The shape of your hands, the instincts that guide you, the spark of creativity in your mind, all are echoes of ancient survivors. You don't walk this earth alone. You walk with the strength of countless generations behind you. Their victories are your inheritance. Their resilience is your blood. When you face challenges, large or small, remember, you are the descendant of people who faced far greater and endured. The legacy within you is proof that survival is not just possible, it is who you are. And so the story closes, not with an ending, but with a continuation. From 1280 to billions, from caves to cities, from whispers in the dark to voices across the stars, humanity's echo resounds without end. As you drift into sleep, know this: you are part of that infinite echo. You are proof that when everything seemed lost, humanity endured. The flame of survival passed to you, and through you, it will pass again. History for sleep becomes history for life. A gentle reminder that even on the darkest nights, the human story goes on, and it always will. The earth itself was a silent witness to humanity's struggle. Mountains stood unmoved as generations passed. Rivers carved their courses long before the first humans drank from them. Forests grew and fell, while tiny groups of humans tried to endure within their shadows. The earth did not favor us, nor did it conspire against us. It simply was. Yet in adapting to it, in bending but not breaking, we learned the deepest lesson of survival: harmony. Humanity did not conquer the earth. We listened to it, learned from it, and in return, it allowed us to remain. Above, the sky was not empty. It was a map. For those early humans, the sun told the rhythm of days, the moon marked the passing of months, and the stars whispered of directions unseen. They had no compasses, no clocks, no written words, yet they knew the skies as if they were close companions. The arc of Orion, the curve of the Milky Way, the rising of the morning star, each offered guidance. The sky was both a mystery and a teacher, and so by looking up, humanity found its way forward, step by fragile step. As much as food or shelter, humanity needed stories. Around the fire, when night was long and fear was near, stories bound people together. They were not written nor recorded, but lived in memory and voice. Stories of the hunt, of spirits, of ancestors, of the stars above, all passed from one mouth to another. Storytelling was survival in another form. It taught lessons, warned of dangers, and gave meaning to hardship. Even now, as you listen, you continue that same ancient ritual, sharing in a story to find rest, comfort, and connection. At first glance, being so few seemed a weakness. Just 1280 souls scattered across dangerous lands. But smallness also gave strength. Small groups could move quickly, adapt to sudden change, and care for one another with intimacy. Everyone's role mattered. No life was invisible. This intimacy, this awareness that each person was vital, helped humanity survive when larger numbers might have collapsed. Sometimes survival is not about being many. It is about being few and being united. Picture one small group huddled in a cave, fire flickering low. The flame sputters, sparks fly, and smoke curls into the night. That fire is everything. Without it, cold creeps in, predators grow bolder, darkness swallows hope. How many times did our ancestors sit in silence, praying that the flame would hold? Fire was fragile, just like them. And yet, both fire and humanity endured. This fragility is part of our story. We are strong not because we were unbreakable, but because we kept going even when everything could have gone out. Before words, before writing, humanity spoke with hands and eyes. A gesture could warn of danger. A glance could signal trust. The simplest nod could mean the difference between life and death. This unspoken language, born in the bottleneck, still lives in us. A mother's smile to her child, a friend's reassuring touch, the silent comfort of company. These are echoes of the first ways we ever communicated. Words would come later, but humanity's first language was one of presence, connection, and care. Scarcity shaped every choice. Food was never guaranteed, warmth never certain, safety never absolute. This constant tension trained humanity to value what little they had. Nothing was wasted. Every hide, every bone, every ember served a purpose. Even today, when abundance surrounds us, traces of that memory remain. We hoard, we prepare, we fear loss, because once, survival meant knowing hunger intimately. Scarcity left a permanent imprint on the human spirit, reminding us that everything precious must be cherished. The true victory of the bottleneck was not just that adults endured, but that children survived. Each newborn represented hope, a fragile vessel carrying the future. Protecting them required sacrifice. Food was given up. Warmth was shared. Dangers faced. Every child who lived became a new chance for humanity. Without them, the line would have ended. Their laughter, their cries, their first steps were the most powerful proof that life could go on. The children of survival became the ancestors of all to come. For those early groups, the horizon was both fear and promise. To walk toward it was to risk the unknown, predators, famine, uncharted lands. Yet it was also possibility. New rivers, new herds, new shelters might lie beyond. And so humanity became wanderers, guided by both fear and hope. This spirit of walking toward the horizon never left us. It lives in every migration, every voyage, every exploration. Even today, as we look toward the stars, we are still that same species, forever stepping into the unknown. As you rest now, consider this gentle truth. You are alive because 1280 people refused to give up. They endured hunger, loss, storms, and endless nights so that thousands of generations later, you could dream. Their survival flows in your veins, their courage beats in your heart, their hope shines in your thoughts. The story of humanity is not just theirs, it is yours. Sleep then, in the comfort of knowing you belong to the greatest survival tale ever told. A story still unfolding with every breath you take. There were times when silence must have felt overwhelming. No hum of machines, no distant roads, no constant voices. Just the sound of wind through trees, the crackle of fire, the call of distant animals. For early humans, silence was not emptiness. It was awareness. It was listening for danger, listening for each other, listening for the earth itself. That silence trained us to notice, to pay attention, to live fully present in each moment. It shaped the human mind as surely as hunger or cold. Somewhere there must have been a river that never dried, a lifeline in a changing world. When other streams vanished, this one endured. Its waters quenched thirst, drew animals to hunt, nourished plants to gather. Perhaps this river was the heart of survival, the center of the refuge where the 1280 held on. We will never know its exact name or place, but we know it must have existed, for water is life. That single river may have been the thread that stitched humanity's story together. When numbers are small, every face becomes familiar. Each person is irreplaceable. A glance across the fire, a smile during hardship, a hand offered in help. These moments became lifelines. Familiar faces carried trust, belonging, and hope. Even today, when billions surround us, we find comfort in the same way. A loved one's face, a friend's presence, a child's laughter. They remind us that we are never meant to face life alone. Survival required memory. Where the best hunting grounds lay, which plants could heal, which paths were safe, which storms would come. These memories had to be carried generation after generation. There was no paper, no books, no writing. Knowledge lived only in minds and voices. Elders were libraries, storytellers were teachers. Without memory, survival would have been impossible. And so humanity became a species that remembers. Even now, our cultures, our families, our traditions are ways of carrying memory forward. Amid the struggle, creativity flickered. Someone struck stone against stone and found sparks. Someone shaped a sharper blade. Someone tied fibers into rope. Someone painted lines on cave walls. Creativity was not luxury, it was survival. Each new idea gave humanity an edge against extinction. The habit of imagining, of asking what if, was born in the bottleneck. That same spark now fuels art, science, and dreams of the future. At night, when fire dimmed, the stars became eternal watchers. They looked down on those 1280 survivors just as they look down on you now. For them, the stars were mystery, perhaps spirits, perhaps guides. For us, they are suns across unimaginable distances. Yet the feeling is the same: wonder, awe, humility. The stars remind us how small we are, and yet how vast our story has become. They were witnesses to humanity's near extinction and to its rebirth. Imagine the echo of footsteps across dry earth, across stone, across sand. Each step was survival. Each path taken was a choice that could mean life or death. Our ancestors walked not just for food, but for tomorrow. Their footsteps became migrations. Migrations became journeys. Journeys became the spread of humanity across the world. Every step you take today is an echo of theirs. We are still walking the same path, carrying the same will to endure. When so few people existed, kinship was more than blood. It was survival itself. Families extended into tribes, and tribes into alliances. Each bond was delicate, but each bond mattered. Kinship offered protection, shared resources, and hope for future generations. Breaking trust could break survival itself. From those fragile webs of kinship grew the foundations of human society. Even today, every community, every friendship, every bond traces back to those first alliances among the few who remained. To live so close to extinction was to breathe with the earth itself. The rhythm of seasons, the pulse of rainfall, the sigh of winds, all shaped survival. Humans did not stand apart from nature, they were woven into it. Every meal, every shelter, every birth depended on Earth's breath. Though we build cities now, that bond remains. Our breath is still the Earth's breath. Our lives are still bound to its rhythms. As you rest with this story, remember, you are the living proof of resilience. Out of 1280 fragile lives across countless generations, through storms and scarcity and silence, you are here. The fire still burns, the story still continues, and the journey still unfolds. Sleep now, knowing that your existence is not random. It is the triumph of survival, the persistence of hope, the quiet victory of humanity's most fragile chapter.